So let's get right to it with regards to, I've been covering a lot about China-U.S. relations, U.S. escalations with China. Your film, The Coming War on China, was about 6 years ago now when it was released. And a lot of your coverage was 2015 and prior. So it's been about 7 years since that film was released. And we've seen a host of escalations under Obama, then Trump, and now Biden. The recent, most, I think, talked about one was Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan, backed by military aircraft, naval forces. Do you want to comment on, what are your thoughts now after you produced that film, and how things have transpired between the U.S. and China since then?
Well, I remember clearly when I was writing the title, and I scribbled down The Coming War on China and handed it to my producer, and he said, that's too extreme. No, we've got to come in gentler than that. That's provocative. I said it's meant to be provocative because that's what's happening. So that was 2016. Trump, the year Trump was elected, it was several years after Obama had announced the so-called pivot to Asia, the build-up of the greater strength of U.S. naval shipping in the Pacific ever. The arming and rearming of some 400 bases, US bases, which then, and do today, of course, surround China from Australia all the way up through the Pacific, South Pacific, Marshall Islands, across to the Philippines, up to Thailand, Korea, Japan, Okinawa, of course, part of Japan, is practically an entire US base with weapons such as the Aegis guided missiles aimed at the industrial heartland of China. I mention this in some detail because you never hear what I've just said on the news. Who knows that China is ringed by such aggressive military American presence? All we've had for the last few years is China making something out of the Spratly Islands, which are barely islands, and in fact building defense airstrips to these bases. So that's when I began to make the film. And since then, of course, the provocation has not been on the title of my film. The provocation has all come from the United States. I remember somebody in Shanghai, an academic with close ties to the government, saying, "Do you really want us to be an enemy?" Because he was mentioning you regarding the West. Because if you do, you're going about it very, very quickly. So I would think that it's changed completely the general mood. There was a kind of almost a benign mood in China then. There isn't now.
Right. No, so much has happened since then. And, you mentioned that there's this ring of military bases. You described it in the film as a noose around China. And
described that way by somebody in the State Department really took me aback. Somebody who I didn't think would barely open his lips to me. And he came out with this. It's our noose.
Wow. Yeah. But all we hear about is China being the aggressor. And What do you think about this narrative of China being the aggressor? Because I feel like that's all we hear in the Western media, that there isn't any deviation from that line. And as you said, there's a complete media blackout about what the United States is doing militarily in that region to provoke China.
Well, you know, Danny, the way you described that's all we hear, as you rightly say, that is indeed all we hear, that China is the aggressor. But that can be applied to all the accredited enemies of the United States, and I suppose of the West, its vassals. And so again, we're banging our heads against this wall of a one-sided perception, a one-sided media. It's not as if we take one side ourselves in particular, but the perception is so warped. I'm broadening this because it's something that almost stops our argument, that the one-sidedness of, and we're talking about basically media here because they are the purveyors of this distorted, mutated perception. China is not an imperial country. It has its own sphere of influence. It's a vast country with a large number of people, but it has no interest in being a 19th century country like the United Kingdom or the United States. Its interest is clear, and it's clear to most people in the world what it wants to do. It wants to develop itself and to put in the past the grinding poverty and suffering that its people went through for hundreds of years. That's what China is. And the very notion of our creating this enemy to be provoked, to be threatened, to the point where the enemy, as I understand it, has changed its nuclear posture from low alert to high alert. It's building up its army quickly. It's diverting much of its extraordinary technological power into the military. It wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't threatened.